Hey there, thank you for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris and welcome to another episode of Bionicle Fanon Reviews, where I review the fan-created canonized Bionicle models. These are not official sets, but instead have officially been inducted into the Bionicle Generation 1 storyline, either via official LEGO contests like the Dark Hunter or Rahi contests in 2005, or via the more modern TTV canonization contests, such as the Toa Helrix one, the Artaka one, and the upcoming Toa Haga one, which have been overseen by Greg Farshty, the herald of the Bionicle G1 storyline himself. Today's model is a pretty interesting one, and has a bit of an interesting meta backstory. This is the Kirikori Nui, which is a Rahi native to the island of Mata Nui. Since it is a Rahi, it's not like there's a lot of deep lore or storytelling behind the character of this model. It's just a Grasshopper Rahi. Honestly, that's the most interesting about it. It's literally just a large Bionicle grasshopper. The interesting thing, though, about this model in particular is that this was not actually created by a fan and submitted for a canonization contest. Instead, this was embedded within the club magazines as an inspirational model all the way back when Bionicle launched in 2001. As such, this was actually built by official LEGO designers, just throwing together different pieces from Throwbots and Technic and Bionicle and trying to come up with the best models they could to inspire people to build unique stuff in the world of Bionicle. So obviously this is not a set, it never was actually released for the public. It's not quite a combiner model because it just uses a ton of random pieces, but it's not just a normal canonized model either. It kind of sits in between, and honestly I think that's what makes it really interesting. There were only two models that actually came out of this process of canonization. It was this, as well as another model which was called the Ranama, which was basically a giant frog. The rest of the LEGO Club instruction buildings actually pertain to combiner models, which are not the topics of this review. Pretty much every single other Club Magazine instruction generated canon model actually was built out of combiner pieces from existing Bionicle sets, which isn't really within the scope of these reviews. This falls into a bit of a strange middle ground, but I figured, why not review this? A ton of people actually have asked me about this in the comments if I will review this, and well, that's why I'm here. So just to describe how I typically review canon models, just in case this is your first video, I usually review them on 4 key points. Number 1 is posability, so can I get this into good poses? For the bipedal characters, does it mean that I can hold up their weapons without their arms drooping or having them do the splits and fall over? Can they actually support their own weight and whatnot? Number 2 is building techniques. So does this utilize unique building techniques and parts usages, or does it just recycle things from the sets? And is its construction generally stable, which is definitely tied into posability as well. The third point is aesthetics. So this is agnostic of the storyline. It's just in general, does this look good? Am I happy with the color blocking and the color scheme? And does this look like what it's supposed to represent? In this case, a large grasshopper. And finally, number 4 is believability in universe. So does this make sense as a Rahi in the Bionicle storyline? Does this scale well next to other characters from Bionicle, be it Matoran, Toa, or even other Rahi? And does this just make sense in the entire universe as a whole? But with that out of the way, let's just dive right into this model, the Kirikori Nui. Alright, so here we have the Rahi Kirikori Nui from 2001, again built by official LEGO designers, so it's not technically a fan-created model, it's more of an internal LEGO model that was canonized. And as such, it's kind of a special case, but I'm reviewing it anyway. Let's just start things right off with posability. Now this actually does have some action features to its posability, but we'll get to that in a second. First of all, you have a very basic articulation with the legs here, pretty much just what you'd expect by moving them back and forth on this Technic pin, and you've also got the back leg where you can also move it back and forth on another Technic pin as well. This is pretty good for multiple ranges of posability. It's very simple, of course, and unfortunately, if your Technic pins are a little old or maybe they're just not the standard types, you can get it to kind of fall over on different surfaces, so do just be wary of that when you're posing it. It is a little bit weak and probably could have used a little bit more friction or fixed movement to actually allow you to actually pose this regularly without having any danger of it falling over or tilting to the side, kind of like what it's doing right now. In terms of the head itself, you can actually move it up and down as well as back and forth or side to side depending on what angle you use it featuring a technically illegal connection of a Bionicle hand joint just mounted by an axle rod there, which again, LEGO did this a lot in 2001 for official models, even though nowadays it would be considered very illegal. What's also kind of cool is that you can actually articulate the front pincers. These Technic beams are actually mounted without friction, which is both a pro and a con. As a con, it's very easy to kind of get them out of whack and look kind of awkward, but as a pro, you actually get this whole pincer movement, which looks very realistic for a bug-like animal, and something I think is good that they included overall. Of course, you do have the articulation of moving the antenna back and forth as well, although I'm not really sure how intentional this was. And just moving on to the final points of articulation here, you've got the back legs. These back Technic beams can basically be rotated back and forth without any friction and can kind of tend to collapse backwards if you're not really paying too much attention. What's really cool about this though is that this is all mounted on the Throwbot/Roborider gearbox, which means twisting this in the back can actually allow you to articulate the back legs up and down, so you actually could have some sort of a springing motion, almost like a real grasshopper springing off of the ground by twisting this pretty quickly. I think it would have been nice to have some sort of a spring-loaded or rubber band feature, so you could actually have this act as some sort of a spring-loaded jumping leg feature, which actually does feature in some of the Roborider sets, but I can see why they didn't do it because that would have made posability a lot worse than it already is. Lastly, you can move these wing appendages back and forth on the back of the Kirikori Nui right here, but there's not really too much you can do with that, so you could probably just keep it fixed at a certain angle and leave it be. Even just with that, that's basically all I have to say about posability. It's not the best because most limb joints are just mounted on standard Technic pins, which can make it very easy to just fall over, and once one starts falling over, the whole rest of them will fall over as well. But for an animal of this size, it can generally kind of keep its weight up pretty well, especially because there's not a lot of body weight weighing it down. If it was any heavier, it would have been a much bigger problem, but as it is right now, it's not a big deal, and it works out pretty good. Moving on, we can take a look at building techniques. I want to call out my immediate favorite thing about this set is that it uses a very incredibly smart piece usage of the Kanohi Matatu. This was the one worn by Turaga Nuju, but in lime. As you can see, the usage of this mask serves multiple features. First of all, it puts it in line with the other 2001 Rahi who featured Kanohi masks on their bodies. But second, you've also got the really excellent shaping of this mask featuring some sort of an eyebrow for this animal, and I think in conjunction with the ball joint here, it really does look like this creature is intelligent and alive. Even looking at it from the front as I was showing earlier, it does really look like an actual insect with these pincers on the sides, simple Technic beams and simple Technic construction coming together in a really unique way. And this is one of the coolest parts usages that I've seen on a Rahi build yet. Honestly, I think the usage of this mask and the way it's integrated could even be better than many of the integrations of the other 2001 Rahi, which is a major compliment from me and one that I really do think was done excellently. Moving on to the rest of the building techniques and piece usages, sure, this probably could have been a little bit more complex. It's very simple right now and basically kind of just pretty fragile, but I understand they were working with a limited source of parts, so I don't fault it too much. It is just a little bit too simple to me in my opinion, and of course the back legs are really just mounted on one beam to another, so you can very clearly see where one beam ends and the other begins, but that is kind of saved by the inclusion of this really fun gear feature, which I think was a great one to include, and honestly is actually pretty surprisingly fun to play with just to pose this around. Of course, you have some other strange components here like the Roborider's back component, which not really sure what that's even doing there, doesn't really serve a major purpose, but that is saved by some great parts usages of the flex hoses used as the antenna here. And finally, moving on to aesthetics, the only major con I have is that I feel like there's just too many colors. I'll get into this when I go over the final overview, but in just this image alone, you've got lime, dark gray, white, black, light gray, blue, and tan. Honestly, if they just removed one of those, like if they took out blue or if they took out tan, I would have been a lot happier. Besides that though, aesthetically speaking, this is pretty excellent. And from the side profile, I can immediately see exactly what this model is supposed to convey. But with that, let's just zoom out. It's a bit of a shorter review, but it is a smaller model. We can now zoom out and compare this against some representative samples in the Bionicle universe. Alright, so here we have the Kirikori Nui alongside some other representative samples from the Bionicle universe. namely some of the Rahi from 2001, which of course were created at the same time that this model was built. We have the Nui Jaga, which is a scorpion-like insectoid Rahi, the Nui Rama, who shares the lime green color scheme, as well as the diminutive Ussel Crab from the Bionicle Rahi Master Builder set. So my big question when looking at this is, does this model fit in with the rest of the creatures coming out around the same time? And honestly, it's basically perfect. Obviously, this has the added benefit of actually being made by LEGO designers, some of which, for all I know, were the same people who designed these animals. So it's no wonder that this fits in pretty perfectly within the 2001 Rahi biomes. Obviously, the big draw to this as well is that it includes a Kanohi mask on the front of the Rahi, which is pretty much in line with many of the larger Rahi builds from 2001. I do love how well this looks, especially against some of the other animals that are insectoid like the Nui Rama. Really does feel like they go well together and belong to the same ecosystem, with many similar parts being used, such as the wings on the back here being basically the same pieces used for the wings of the Nui Rama, and even the legs just being simple Technic beam connections, which are basically shared with many of the other Rahi. Moving on even beyond that though, I think its predominantly Technic structure really does give it a lot of favors, although I do have to question the inclusion of this light blue color. Feels a little bit out of place if I'm being honest, but I guess you could chalk that up to just additional coloring on this model. And so for believability in universe, I'm just going to start things off by giving this a 10 out of 10. Obviously, made by LEGO designers, so it kind of has that advantage here, but I'd say it is a pretty good representation of a 2001 Rahi, and really looks like it belongs next to these representative samples, which is something I'm really happy about. But setting these aside, let's just review the model based on the other points. Starting off with posability, one of the things I mentioned in the review is that it's stable enough if you're not too heavy-handed with it. If you press down on it too much, the legs can kind of collapse. These are obviously just mounted on individual Technic beams and axles, so you're not really going to get a lot of strict friction articulation there, so it does tend to collapse from time to time, but as long as you generally line up the limbs and pose it well, it's not like it's in really any major danger of just falling over. And after all, since it does have 6 legs, you have that added benefit of having lots of points on the ground, so things aren't going to be slipping too much. Of course, the movement of the head, despite being mounted on some sort of a hinge here, is pretty limited. You can swing it side to side and to a degree up and down, but honestly, that's a little bit more than I was anticipating anyway, so I think it's pretty good. And overall, I really do like how well this works. What's also really cool is you've got this articulation to actually have a spring to the back legs being controlled by the Throwbots or Slizer's gearbox here, which is really cool. Now, if only they included some sort of a rubber band or spring mechanism to actually have this bounce off, I think that would have been even cooler. Some of the Throwbots actually do have that feature built around this exact gearbox, but if they had included that, it may have made it a little bit more unstable, so I can understand why they didn't. So taking all that into consideration, I'm going to give posability an 8 out of 10. There are some things that could have potentially been improved and had some more action features built in, and of course it's not the most stable model with just standard Technic beams and pins being connecting the legs here, but all in all it's pretty decent and you're not going to have many significant issues with it falling over. Honestly, the biggest issue is if you have one leg kind of splayed out to the side here, it can kind of tend to lean towards one side. But that's again also very easily fixed by just readjusting the limbs and setting them back upright. Moving on to the second point, which is building techniques, I'm generally pretty happy with how this is built, especially considering it was really only using pieces available around 2001. The parts usage of the mask here was a great choice, especially because the curve of the mask really does look like it fits seamlessly with the voodoo ball or Technic ball joint used for the eyes of the creature, and I think overall it had some great parts usage, even in the form of these antennae or wings on the back, looking very realistic to some sort of a grasshopper, and just the way that the Technic beams were selected really does evoke that whole insectoid feel, which I think is a really good choice. The antenna, while maybe a little bit too long and rigid, definitely were probably the best they could do at that point, and really the only thing that I would kind of dock here is the technically illegal connection of moving the head up and down here with the ball joint mounted on the side with an axle. As I mentioned in the review, LEGO did this a lot in the combiner models. They were official combiner models and kind of side models like this back in 2001, But of course, that is officially illegal. It does stress the pieces, so I think that was just kind of them getting away with things because it was a very different time back then at LEGO. And so, while it's very simple, it does have a lot of charm to it, and that's why I'm going to give Building Techniques a 7 out of 10. Yeah, the legs probably could have been a little bit better, and sure, the back legs here are just the most basic of Technic constructions, but honestly, it uses these simple pieces and very basic pieces very well. And I can immediately get the point across with the shaping of this creature just by looking at it at a glance. So that's something I really do like about it, despite being very simple in its construction. But then moving on to aesthetics, the final point, that one might be the one where I feel like this probably has a few too many colors going on. Of course, you got the line, which makes a lot of sense for an animal like this. But then you have some black, some gray, some white, you've also got some of the dark gray here, but the thing that really stands out to me is the very strange use of tan, and specifically tan in combination with this aqua blue color here. I'm not really sure why they actually added those additional colors because, of course, all of these pieces could have existed in lime green, or if not, they could have just done it in gray. As it is right now, if they just had the lime green, gray, black, and tan, I probably would have been fine with it, but then you also have this, I guess, third or fourth color of the blue on the tops of the legs here, which did feel very out of place when I personally was building it, and honestly, if these were tan, it probably would have looked a lot better. It is a little bit distracting to see a completely different color for the legs here, and I know this is definitely personal opinion. Maybe some people will like the color variation, but to me personally, it's just a little distracting, and that's why I'm going to give aesthetics a 7 out of 10 as well. It's alright, some of the color choices are pretty distracting, but overall I do really love how this looks, and the shaping of it definitely looks like an animal. With the back legs here looking like they're spring-loaded for action, you've got the antenna, the head looks really great and has some great parts usages, even having a working pincer if you really want to move it around, and all in all I think it's a pretty good representation of something LEGO designers could have done, especially back in 2001 when building techniques really weren't that refined. But with that, we've about summed up this review of the Kirikori Nui. Let me know down in the comments below, do you like this model? Have you built it yourself? And if so, how have you experienced the building process? As usual, stay tuned to DuckBricks every single Monday for a new Bionicle Fanon review coming every week. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned to DuckBricks for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks so much, and bye-bye for now.